Welcome back to Stop the Takes. I'm Dakota, that's Austin, and we are back from our mini hiatus. We missed a week or two there. Appreciate everybody coming back in. I take full responsibility. Work travel over the past couple weeks prohibited our ability to go live. We apologize to our millions of listeners and viewers out there. We'll have to give a shout out to Byberk. Was in Omaha the past 3 days for the College World Series. My job got to take me out there, so maybe one day I got connections. You may have seen these actually popping up on Hulu ads and whatnot. So maybe we'll have an official sponsor one day from Byberg.
Hey, if we can get a sponsor, if they want to sponsor the show, I'm definitely down for that. Might be a little bit of conflict of interest because if we get too many sponsors, then Dakota might not want to go to his work anymore. So who knows how that's gonna pan out. But I would love to get some sponsors. You are back from Omaha, and I mean obviously other places as well. So busy time at work, but we're back now with another live show to go over NIL. So excited to go over that today. Should be an interesting topic of discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. We are finally we've called this a football podcast, right? But we have primarily been, NFL so far, and we probably will always be a bit heavier on the NFL side. But time to kind of break into the college avenue a bit. With the news that broke a couple weeks ago at this point, almost a week and a half ago now, the House versus NCAA settlement that essentially changes the college athletics landscape as we know it. And what we'll be talking about today is what that means going forward, and then also specifically touching on how the NCAA's absolute incompetence when it came to NIL is what led us here. So, what are your immediate thoughts, reactions to what broke last week?
Immediate thoughts are I'm cautiously optimistic with this. I am, because when I first saw it, I was like, okay, I don't know how all this is going to work, but the most important part of it to me is the NIL clearinghouse, which is basically essentially means all NIL deals over $600 will have to be approved by this auditing agency to see if it's a fair market value. Basically meaning whatever the athlete is signing up to do, whether it's a commercial or it's autograph signings or whatever, if it's not fair market for what they're doing, then it's going to be denied. And I believe we saw that 70% of the ACC NIL deals a year ago would have been denied under these new rules, which is a big number. That's a massive, massive number, dude. And that's across all sports too. So that's like, I'm assuming there's more legitimate NIL deals in other sports outside of football. So imagine what that number is in football, dude. I can't even imagine the amount of NIL deals that would have been denied with these new rules in football. And I talked to you before the show. That's the ACC. Imagine how many would have been denied in the SEC and the Big Ten, which you could argue have the phoniest NIL deals. And we'll kind of get into some of those later. But so I think this could be a good thing over time. It could be. I've said for a while, man, off the show, on the show, or on other shows, that I think contracts are the best way to go in college sports from here on out.
Yep.
Because once NIL was implemented the way it was, you really couldn't do anything about it, right? There was really no going back at that point. And to me, the contracts prevent a lot of the problems we have right now in college football, which I think the main problem to me, if I had to pinpoint one big issue, is the transfer portal and the amount of players in the portal and the lack of player development we're seeing with some of these players because they're going team to team. I think that's the biggest issue. It's the biggest issue for the fans. I think it's a big issue for players. A lot of this is like player centric, and people think, oh, this is all good for the players. But the transfer rules and the NIL that kind of caused the transfer problem was not good for the players. And I don't think it ever was. I mean, we saw in the last draft, Dakota, like what, 25 of the first round draft picks didn't transfer, which that is not the norm in college football. Most players transfer. Most players leave the school, but the majority of players that are considered blue chip prospects didn't transfer. That should tell you something. That's the kind of thing that people should note. Um, so overall, dude, I think all of this could be a good thing. It just depends.
It does. And, I'm a little rusty, so I should have done a better job kind of explaining what all this meant before passing it over. But yeah, for those that don't know, essentially what this settlement resulted in is a $3 billion settlement that has to be paid back to essentially uh, almost over 100,000 athletes that have had played NCAA athletics over the past decade, roughly, um, with the argument basically being made around an antitrust case, and what it resulted in is now revenue sharing. So it's a little bit different than straight up employment, but every university now has the opportunity to do revenue sharing, and essentially have a salary cap of about 20.5 million. And that is to go across every single athletic program at each university. So obviously that drastically changes the scope of college athletics because it is kind of no longer amateur, right? Which has been one of the biggest claim to fames for college athletics is the amateurism that it is. But over time, I don't think anybody predicted that college athletics would turn into a multi-billion-dollar industry. So things have kind of led us down a path to get here, but it has massive implications to change NIL that Austin just touched on, but around the revenue sharing structure, it is essentially up to each university how this is done. So they'll be able to handle the contracts. Players will sign them. There's not a ton of like requirements around that. Each university can kind of do it themselves. And it is at the Power Four level for the most part. And there's going to be a new entity called the College Sports Commission that will also kind of be overseeing a lot of this. But college athletics changing forever, and now having contracts and a salary cap in college football and other athletics is a drastic change over the product that we've grown to love.
Exactly. I mean, and it's kind of goes back to my other point, dude. I think a lot of fans and even decision makers in college athletics, if they could go back, they would to some of the things that was before. Because when NIL was first introduced, it was more about okay, people thought it was going to be okay, kids have a chance to get sponsorships and things like that, but it quickly turned to something else. And it hurt the sport. At the end of the day, it hurt the sport and decision makers, specifically the NCAA in the sport, when they implemented these things, they did it in a fashion that they weren't thinking about the future of the sport. Nobody was thinking about the future of the sport, man. And that's kind of what hurt college athletics and specifically college football. And a lot of the discussion, of course, we're a football channel, so we're going to center it around football, but a lot of it is football. I mean, it's really football and men's basketball that kind of are most impacted by this. Now we're seeing in other sports that it's all sports. But it's going to be interesting because you also brought up the point how schools are going to have like the decision to okay, how much do we want to allocate to each sport, how much do we want to allocate to each position, things like that. It's going to be interesting to see how that kind of goes down and what teams decide to do. It's definitely going to be different across college football and college athletics, but I would guess like SEC schools and Big Ten schools are going to put the majority of their funds into college football. And how it plays out from there is going to be very interesting. But yeah, man, like you said, it's changed forever. It's going to be different forever. And unfortunately, if some of these ideas, like especially the clearinghouse, the NIL clearinghouse, were implemented earlier, a lot of the issues we've seen and individual cases that we're going to talk about would have never happened. These things would have never happened. But again, nobody was thinking about the future of college athletics. They were thinking about right now. The NCAA in particular was thinking about how do we stay relevant right now? How do we stay alive, right? They got to the point where their favorability amongst the public and the athletes and the coaches were so low that they had to do everything that they possibly could to stay alive because people realized, okay, we don't need you. We really don't need you. Like the SEC,
Yeah.
especially these conferences, can break off and be their own entity. So they don't really need the NCAA to do anything. And for even with the playoff system, Dakota, the NCAA hasn't had any say in the college football playoff system. So like these conferences are already getting together and making decisions in the sport. So what the NCAA did was they were like, okay, we have to go now, or else people are going to say, okay, we don't need you around anymore.
Yeah, and to be honest, I think part of the, hasty way they introduced NIL was to also probably try to avoid this settlement.
Yeah.
They were trying to do that to rectify the issues they had caused and knew they were probably responsible for. And then in the end, they still have to pay out essentially $3 billion. And you touched on the allocation by each university, which I think it makes sense to be left up to each one individually. Most of what I see people, that have written about this and, in tune with the schools are saying that they expect 70 to 80 or 70 to 75% to go to football programs. I think the breakdown they most expected was 75 football, 15 men's basketball, 5 to women's, and then 5 to everything else. Women's
Wow.
basketball, that is. And obviously that will vary school to school. Yeah, because one of
That's
the articles I
fascinating.
saw is
Mm.
there's a school that's already said we're expecting to do 85% to football. Um,
Did it
but
say what
yeah,
school?
I didn't.
Mm.
But we'll probably see the
I'm
inverse of
gonna
that, or
guess
like,
Ohio State or Oregon. Let's be honest. It's Ohio State or
yeah,
Oregon.
it's
They're
got to be
already
somebody.
putting the majority of their
Yeah,
resources into football right now anyway. So that's interesting, dude. And I told you before the show, I thought it was going to be about 15 million to football, which just sounds like that's about around the
75.
number
Yeah,
it's going to
yeah.
be. So, yeah, I mean,
But
that's
but with
fascinating, man.
Yeah, but the good news too for other schools though, right? Like a Marquette, right? Like a Marquette's probably going to throw 75% to men's
At
basketball.
basketball. Yeah.
Yeah. So to be honest, in a weird way, and that's if, again, this is a cap that isn't required, right? Like, universities, it's also an option thing. Like they have the ability to do this thing now, and obviously most are going to want to so they can compete. But some aren't going to be able to do a revenue sharing structure where they hand out 20.5 million to their athletes. So it'd be interesting to see what schools don't fully max that out. Um, but either way, you'll see that. And then with that allocation piece also comes, you know, there isn't any rule or guide on how it ties into Title IX. And we're obviously focused on football, but Title IX, essentially, people that are unfamiliar with it, are what kind of help create a bit of equity in college athletics in terms of the women's sports offered and the ratio of that to men's, which is a big thing. And this not really having any say in that is an interesting thing that will probably have to come up and at least be addressed at some point.
Yeah, because I mean, I just got done talking about Oregon. Oregon is the kind of team that would easily go and cut a lot of the women's sports and
Yeah.
even the men's sports that are just not relevant to what the school wants and the boosters want and everything. So,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, those things are definitely going to matter. It's going to be interesting. Um, but to me, man, like it's just, yeah, it's just frustrating because listen, there's a lot of question marks with this, right? Like, are we going to go back to under the table dealings? We just got done discussing is how is it going to impact current NIL deals that people have already signed, things like
Yep.
that. There's a lot of issues with this ruling and how it's going to be implemented and whatnot. But my biggest frustration is, dude, if you just have that NIL clearinghouse before you implement NIL, right? And like you said, they're probably trying to save their ass. They're trying to save the lawsuit, and to my point, they're going on their PR tour so that
Yep.
they don't lose their jobs. And but if you just have that, man, like a lot of these issues never come up. I mean, you probably don't have schools paying players directly like we see from this settlement, right? Because players are already gonna get paid. They got what they wanted. They got the NIL. They got their and which rightfully they should have had. They have what they should have rightfully had, but there's also regulation with it where schools can't go in and say, "Oh, well, we'll just make a collective and we'll get $20 million from the owner of Nike and we'll just make you sign a couple autographs over the course of 6 months." Like They
Yeah,
could have had that already.
literally. And, back to that stat you threw out, it was 70% of
70.
specifically in our contracts with booster collectives would have been denied. But on the flip side of that, 90% of ones with public entities would have been approved, which is the whole point of
Wow.
what NIL was supposed to be.
That's
was
fascinating.
was yeah, was Zakai Ziegler
90.
at Tennessee going and
Yep.
doing a freaking Pals
Or
promo, or
Weigel's.
Gus's Good Times Deli,
Yeah,
whatever.
exactly.
That's what it was
Yeah.
always supposed to be. Um and now we're in this. And one of the things I touched on earlier with the College Sports Commission, which will change things a bit as well at the Power Five conference level, is that schools have to sign on to that, but could be exposed if not. So they're kind of forced into it unless they want to leave a conference and try to go elsewhere. But that probably ties back into the Greg Sankey comments of,
Mm-hmm.
instead of doing that, going your own route with it. So, and personally, and we've already touched a little bit on the positive side. Even with being a fan of a team in the SEC, I think the frustration from the like Sankey is just that this, in a weird way, does promote more equality across the board in college athletics, and the SEC obviously wants to be dominant. Like, that is one thing that's a bit unique about college sports compared to like the NFL, especially football specifically, is that you can have straight up dominance by certain teams, where in the NFL, unless you build a roster for it, it doesn't really happen. But because things were being done under the table, because of resources and facilities and things that benefit your program from a money perspective, you could do that. And essentially, Sankey's is kind of upset for the fact that others will have an equal opportunity to some
But he
degree.
shouldn't be though, because and this is kind of gets into more of the positive of it, Dakota. What I
Yeah.
think, if this works, right? If this works the way it's intended, and there's not a bunch of under the table dealings, and the clearinghouse actually is doing good auditing and things like that, which there's some question marks with that as well. But if all of it works the way it's intended, which I'm not getting my hopes up that it will be, but if it does, then student or excuse me, athletes. I'm not calling them student athletes anymore. I think that's a ridiculous term. They haven't been student athletes in a long time. But athletes will make the decision where they want to go to school based on their future rather than short-term money, right? Rather than how much money can I make in the short term. It'll be more based on, okay, what school is best for my future to make it to the NFL, for my family, and what school fits me best. You'll take the money. If you take the money factor out of it, then that's the decision that kids are going to make. That's the decision that their families are going to make. And that's good for the sport, because I've also told you this off air, Dakota, that I believe if athletes make that decision, like not based on money, right? If they make the decision where they want to play 4 years of college football or 3 years or whatever, then they will make the decision, and that will likely be the school they play for, right? They will go to the school that they want to be at, and they will stay at, and they will develop at. So that will in turn fix the portal issues, which I think were the majority of the portal issue outside of the rule changings in the portal were NIL and the implementation of it. So if you fix the portal, dude, I think that's really going to fix the sport. Because I've said this multiple times, dude. As a fan of a team, right? We're both fans of the Tennessee Volunteers, but anybody watching this, whoever you're a fan of, you have to admit right now the way things are operating, it is hard to become a fan of any player on your team, because you have, I mean, think about it from our perspective, man. An individual case, Nico, right? The Nico situation. How many Tennessee fans had Nico jerseys last year that now are burning those jerseys, giving those jerseys, throwing them away because of NIL and the portal and things like that? So if athletes are staying at a particular school, fans are actually going to be able to become fans again, right? They're going to actually be able to grow up and watch a player that they love, and that player is going to stay at that school because they're not making their recruitment decision based on money. And that will help the sport overall, man. It'll help grow the fan base of college football.
You're 100% right. And it one thing that will tie into that is with the fact that the universities can have contracts. We talked about this before we started. I'm very curious to see, since it's entirely up to each school, what the average length of those looks like. From the school's perspective, they're obviously going to want to sign everybody to 4-year deals. but the players are going to have a little bit of power in that. So when you see like a lot of 2-year deals, to be honest, I'd be surprised if you see a lot of 1-year ones, unless it's like transfer guys that you're, trying to get in there for a season of. Um, but one thing too with that is, which I have not seen, information on, is with tampering and things that we know are going on now. How are those contracts going to be affected when, if it's related to another university, if a player is trying to break a contract, are they going to sit out, hold out? Like, how they'll miss out on their money, but if another team has offered them some more money from the revenue sharing for their deal, be curious to see how all those things start to play out. But to your point, I think it should limit the transfer portal stuff, especially when these kids come out of high school and they sign a deal for 2 or 3 years, whatever it is. It's now contractually obligated rather than just, an NIL deal that they're making money on until they decide to go somewhere else and get some more. So in a weird way, we talked about this a lot before we hopped on. It does solve an issue, but an issue that was created by the NCAA in the first place.
Yeah.
Because had we had this conversation talking about direct salary cap paying players like 7-8 years ago with college athletics, we would have been like, what are you talking? Why would we want this?
Why would we do
why
it?
Why would that ever be a consideration? And we got to take what we can get from the NCAA screwing
Exactly.
up. But
that's exactly right, Dakota, because I would say right now, I don't think that's what's like if you could pick any
Right.
outcome, right? You could pick any, like, make any decision and make it go into law. I don't think this is the best decision for the sport.
Right.
I don't. But sometimes in life, you take the best of bad solutions. And that's kind of where we're at, because we're, like you said, we have to clean up this mess. We have to clean up this mess that the NCAA created with the implementation of NIL. So that's where we're at. But the all of the contract stuff is so fascinating, and that's where we're going to kind of tie it to the NFL a little bit, because for one, I have one point to make, because you say the 2-year deal thing. I think that would greatly benefit the sport, man. If a player had to be locked in for 2 seasons, think about the Dante Moore situation with UCLA and Oregon. Dante Moore signs there as, I believe, a 5-star, if I'm not mistaken. Dante Moore was a 5-star coming out of high school. And of course, UCLA paid him a lot of money. I mean, that's the world we were in. So he got paid a lot of money to go to UCLA, not play. If I'm not mistaken, he never played there. He may have played some backup snaps or whatever, but he did not have a great role there ever. Played there for a season and then transferred to Oregon, and now he's gone. And it's like, dude, I mean, that's just, to me, dude, it's just that's such a problem, right? Because all the fans of that school were like, let's go. We got a 5-star quarterback out of high. Like, that's a huge commitment for them. And then the guy does absolutely nothing there. He doesn't even play football there. You lose that NIL money. I mean, UCLA's not getting that money back. Like, that money does not have to be paid back.
No.
And now he's gonna go make an impact at a different school. Like, that's just, it's just not good for the sport, man. It's not. So I think 2-year deals fix a lot of that. Number 2, what's interesting is, because we keep talking about this allocation and like how much schools are going to spend. Let's say 15 million is the number. I think that's about where most SEC schools and Big Ten schools will land for football. 15 million. So of that 15 million, how much are you going to allocate to each position? What makes that interesting, Dakota, is in college athletics, it's different than the NFL, because the NFL, you have one franchise quarterback. But look at Tennessee's roster right now. You have to pay. Look how many guys we got on the roster. Multiple 4-stars. We have a 5-star coming in. In college athletics, you're recruiting the same position every single year because there's so much roster turnover. For one, if you're a good player, you're only going to be in school for 3 years. But for 2, you also have to deal with the portal situation. So does that mean, like, to get guys to commit and actually come to your school, are you going to have like 3 starting caliber QB contracts at one single time, like in a season? That's where we would be next year as a Tennessee Vols fan. We would have Merklinger, we would have McIntyre, and we would have Faison coming in. That's 3 starting caliber quarterbacks that you have to pay to keep on your, if you want to, you have to make cuts somewhere, obviously. And so I think that's
Yeah.
my point is it could potentially hurt the depth of rosters and teams' abilities to like load up on 4 and 5 star players.
And then it all, again, everything ties back to the existing state of NIL, even with the clearinghouse, though, is if selling points to get some guys to come to your school, to your point, right? Like, let's say, you've already allocated a lot of money to quarterback, receiver, whatever, but you really need edge rushers or whatever. You don't have a ton of salary cap left to play with. Are you able to like do introduction to NIL deals, avoiding the collective stuff? They're going to still try it because 30% of them for that ACC example would have been approved. So, but how does that tie into like the time frame of that where they have to, hope that it gets approved after the fact? Will it like reverse, you know what I mean? And then or just introduction into other opportunities. You maybe see instead of going the collective route that all the schools did, will you see more instances where schools partner with big name brands and companies to then try to offer NIL deals as a junction to making up for the revenue sharing they're going to miss out on,
Yeah.
And will that be part of contract still? Because it might be able to.
And this kind of all this is, it's a very confusing stuff. Let's be honest. This is not the college football that we grew up loving. It's all very confusing. And my next point is college head coaches have the hardest job. Well, I won't say the hardest job in the country. That's pretty controversial. Right now, as far as coaching is concerned, college football coaches probably have the hardest coaching jobs in America because, dude, first of all, you have to recruit year round. You have to coach the football team, by the way. You have to coach the team. And you also have to now basically continue to recruit your own players. And then now you add this salary cap onto it. Listen, teams have got to hire general managers because there is absolutely no way head coaches are going to be able to manage the salary cap. Like, there's just no way. It also gets into another point, like what's the cap penalty gonna be? Like if you go over the cap, like what's all that penalty gonna be? But yeah, man, like they're gone are the days that like head football coaches are going to be able to manage all the recruiting and the roster, like the player development and the player acquisition side of things. There's just no way you could do it. You don't have the time, and they're not equipped to do that kind of job.
And to your point, and when we get back to the fact that corruption has just plagued college athletics, the NCAA for a while, the one negative to that College Sports Commission that I referenced earlier is that it will be administered by the powerful schools. So there's your regulation on salary cap. And do we trust that method? Like, I don't know if we trust that method of policing it.
They have to regulate themselves. So it's like,
yeah,
that's like, that makes no sense to me. I mean, so like if Oregon breaks that, which Oregon will be, I'm guessing Oregon will be the first team to break the rules in all of this. That's just kind of how they've been.
Phil Knight.
Yeah, that's just how they've been operating, dude. I mean, their recruiting's better than it's ever been, and it's because they have money.
That Nike money.
Yeah, exactly, the Nike money. So here's the deal: when they break the rule, then we go to the College Commission, who is basically the Power Four conferences, which includes Oregon, and they have to come up with the punishment. It's like, that's just, it's going to be a slap on the wrist, man. Like, that's the answer. It's going to be a slap on the wrist. So that's where I get into this, that's why I'm cautiously optimistic instead of just full on, let's go, this is a good thing for college football and college sports as a whole, because I'm worried that this is going to be just like okay, schools can now pay players and there's a salary cap, but there's not, like, it doesn't really matter, the salary cap, and teams are just going to go over it constantly.
And it comes back to things, and in a weird way, I'm sure some college fans will legitimately stop caring about college athletics as much after this and football. But in a weird way, you could also see some college football fans become NFL fans a bit more by just seeing what this structure looks like and how it is basically the same product then. You know what I mean? And like, we're getting to experience things like, which is another aspect of this, is how this all works in terms of like when these contracts are going to be paid out. I don't know if their signing bonuses are a part of that or if they're allowed to have a signing bonus because typically that's outside of the cap. But like the Saints, for those that don't know, the Saints have been notorious for like the last 8 years where they just were always over the salary cap. But what they did is just consistently restructure deals to basically push all that pay to a future date and year. It eventually caught up to them and has now decimated their roster. But for a college football program, like if they're able to do that as a new strategy to go all in on winning right now, where you sign a bunch of dudes and you're like putting their payouts over the next 2 to 3 seasons, like how do things like that work within this? You know what I mean?
What a disaster, dude. Yeah, I know, man. Like, so that's a good point about college fans maybe like learning more about the NFL just by following college football, because a lot of like that's why you see college, front offices forming, right? We're seeing GMs being hired, and I'll say the Power Four schools that aren't hiring a GM right now, it's a huge mistake. And that includes our own school. Our own school needs to hire a GM, or we're going to be left in the dust.
We need to apply. We'll co-apply.
We'll apply. We'll be co-GM of the Tennessee Vols, but yeah, I mean it's going to be interesting. There's also the question of performance-based salary. So there's a lot to discuss with that, but performance-based salary, maybe you promise a quarterback, hey, you can make this X amount if you beat out so and so in camp to be the starting quarterback or whatever, or you win this amount of games and you bump up their pay like this. It's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out and how it forms and how college front offices form. I will say, if it gets to the point to where, and I don't even know how this would work, but if there's like trades and stuff and there's like a true free agency period in college football, that could be pretty fun. I mean, some of our, favorite moments in the NFL is the offseason and the draft and the free agency and the trade deadline, things of this nature. It's like that could be pretty interesting to follow. But a college version.
That's another fantastic point, because again, I don't think, much like anything the NCAA does or is forced to do, or when rulings happen, like I don't think everything has been thought out, and we definitely don't know all the details yet.
Yeah.
But that's a very good point. With contracts breeds the ability to do trades. Like if they exist. So, I mean, we just gonna have like breaking news that Bryce Underwood has been traded to SMU or some crap. You know what I mean? Like that will be wild and fascinating to witness. And honestly, it will be kind of exciting to have that as an opportunity. And again, comes back to limiting the transfer portal stuff, where if the schools are at least a bit more in control there, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But yeah, this is about to be a fascinating thing. And one thing I just want to make sure I touched it because I forgot about it. But with this salary cap piece, it's a 10-year deal, essentially, settlement for now, where it will increase by 4% each year over that 10-year period. Yep. So in essentially 2035, that will be about $30 million. It'll be a little over $30 million worth of cap space. So,
well, it speaks to your point of, it will change. And it kind of goes back to your point of how contracts are structured, how teams can look like backload contracts to try to get an advantage. Now it's not going to be, I don't think it's going to be as potent as it is in the NFL, because the NFL salary cap changes are decided by owners, and like the NFLPA, I believe, has part of that too. So all of that's decided like per offseason, and sometimes you see like $20-30 million jumps in one single offseason, and it's less predictable. Like this is like already set, like to Dakota's point, it's 4% each year. That's not going to change unless something else changes. But so that is interesting. But yeah, you could definitely see that. You could definitely see teams backloading to try to win more right now.
And it also, I mean, that's another good point anyway, though, that like it means that like to your point, which about hiring GMs, we got to shout out Steve, right? Got to shout out Steve from Check the Mic. We've referenced them. He interviewed for the Michigan State GM job. He's always joked about, or been serious about trying to get NFL.
Apparently serious. We had no idea until he got an interview.
No, I don't know if Sam knew either. But he interviewed for the Michigan State job. They decided to go in a different direction. So But with that, one of the unique aspect that you just pointed out too, though, is that as a GM of one of these programs, you can sit down and look at the next 10 years and go ahead and start allocating everything because you
Yep.
do know what that salary cap will be. So it'd be funny when they're like sign a kid on this year and they're like, we'll give you 150 grand right now. And then in 2032, we're going to give you like 5 million.
It's yeah, dude, it's also this is so many interesting things to talk about because another aspect is like how I wonder the role of the GM. Now, the role of the GM in the NFL is different team to
Yeah.
team, right? Like, some GMs have more like player personnel decision making than others. Um, but in the NFL, a lot of teams' GMs are the boss of the head coach. They do the hiring, the coaching hiring. So I'm curious how that will form in college as well. If these GMs will start to hire
Oh, good point.
coaches and firing coaches, and if they're going to make player personnel decisions. And of course, even in the NFL, when a GM makes a player personnel decision, it's with what the coaches want in mind, right? It's they're going to get players and acquire players that fit the coach's scheme. But they're the decision makers in a lot of cases. They're the ones making the ultimate decision. Okay, we want to sign this guy or we don't. So and how will some college coaches handle that? A lot of the old heads that have been there a while have always made those decisions. So how will they handle that? And I mean, it could really, I mean, like we're saying, dude, this ruling is absolutely going to change football, like college football. It's going to change college football, and it's going to continue to change a lot over the next 10 years.
I mean, you just mentioned it too. Like there is so many things to talk about here, and that's another really fascinating one with like the hierarchy that will exist in athletic programs. Because where does the GM fall in relation to the AD?
Yeah.
Right? Like, is the AD gonna? I guess the AD probably be the one hiring the GM that then is, but then do they have a say in hiring coaches going forward? And you'll see things like in the NFL where I guess when things go south, like Michigan State, we know they're going to have one. When
Yes.
things go south, are they just going to clear house? Let's fire the
Well,
GM and head coach.
yeah. And Andrew Luck is the current GM of the Stanford Cardinals right now.
Yep,
And he
he
hired
is.
Frank Wright.
He can
So he
still go
already
play
did the coach
QB
hiring. Yeah,
for him.
exactly. And he already did the coaching hiring. So it's like
True.
it's interesting. It's very interesting. I'm also curious the GM's role, because we're talking about a football perspective. Are they hiring
Yeah.
separate GMs for basketball and
Yeah.
women's basketball and baseball? Like, it's going to depend program to program because you made the point,
Yeah.
like Murray State, they're going to be more focused on college basketball. So like most their funding is going to go to college basketball. And that's just the reality. But a school like Ohio State, who really only cares about one school, all their funding is going to go to football. Probably 20 million of it's going to football, and their GM is definitely going to be more football centric.
You just, yeah, opening up job opportunities. You
Yeah,
just got me a little excited. I mean, if I go apply at Southeast Missouri State to be their GM, am I
yeah,
in the
dude.
running? I'll
Why
do it for what?
not?
Cheaper than other guys.
Yeah,
Put me in there.
now,
Let's see
now
what we can do.
Dakota's going to leave Stuff the Takes to go be a GM.
GM at some very low, small school where I'm making less money than.
As long as you hire me as co-GM
There we go. We'll go in together. We have to do that.
and
Where no matter
continue
when we
Stop the
blow up,
Takes.
yeah, it's a part of the deal, like Steve was. But yeah, I mean, it is. We could talk about this stuff forever because again, it is changing a landscape that we've known for a very long time. But if you want, we can go ahead and kind of pivot to the second half of the conversation, which is more around NIL.
Yes.
So we've touched on it a bit of how this does impact NIL. So with the big changes that we've already touched on a bit, which is the clearinghouse, which we've been managed by Deloitte, which is a third party, essentially consulting tax auditing service. So they're the ones that are going to be managing that. It also introduces a new platform called NIL Go, which is kind of a platform to report third party NIL agreements, specifically valued at $600 or more. So every deal done NIL wise that is over $600 will not have to go through that clearinghouse.
Do they have to audit all the EA college football game Because don't they get like $1,500 now
Yeah,
for that?
yeah.
So that they have to audit every single one of those EA's payments to these players.
Yours is
Good
denied.
luck.
Sorry.
Good
You
luck with
shouldn't have been in
that,
the
Deloitte.
game.
Yeah, you should have been in the game, buddy.
Yeah.
Or some of the auditors going to be like, know that player sucks in the game and got pissed because they like screwed him out of like an ultimate team game and just deny their NIL all of a sudden.
Yeah, and the one positive with that, we touched on the college sports commission thing and how it is completely open to corruption again. Using a third party makes it seem a little bit more promising that there'll be less bias involved. That being said, there's always the opportunity for boosters to just suddenly start investing in Deloitte or doing some partnership with them, and then things go south.
Oh
So
man! All of a sudden, Phil Knight buys Deloitte and
that's
just
that's the next thing.
yeah,
Nike
exactly.
is now sole owner of Deloitte
Yeah,
auditing.
that's what's gonna happen next, dude. Yeah,
Oh man.
it's I don't know. I agree with you. I think the third party aspect of it is a good thing. And I think this clearinghouse overall is a good thing. And that's kind of where we're getting into NIL going wrong, which
Yep.
is again, this clearinghouse could have prevented all of this. Really could have prevented this whole lawsuit. I really think the NCAA could have saved themselves if they went with this clearinghouse situation, or at least maybe mitigated it a little bit. But yeah, dude, it's just the way the NCAA handled the situation was just about as bad as you could possibly handle a situation.
Quite simply, and I know that most, there was a smaller minority of people that were anti NIL in general, which I think is more just not understanding what it was. There is a group of boomer mentality of just like college athletes are getting scholarships, so they should make no money other than that. But as college athletics changed, and football specifically, and became a profitable industry on its own, like it was kind of crazy that college athletes signed over the right to their name, image, and likeness, and that was always the main issue, right? And I think again, like I just said, most people would agree that that's not okay. Like nobody should be doing that. But in true NCAA fashion, they introduced something that did not work, and they've proven time and time again that they're unfit to be a governing body.
Yeah.
And the frustrating part is that it comes back to some absolutist mentality where then when this thing goes wrong, the sad part is that a lot of the backlash then happens on NIL in general because it was done so poorly that people get upset about it as a concept, but not the fact that it was just done incorrectly.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where most people are. I think most people
Yeah.
are upset at it because it was done incorrectly. I mean, that's why the NCAA did it. I mean, the NCAA, they were in such an unfavorable position that they had to change quickly. And that's why they did what they did. That's why they gave the players what they wanted, which was what the players should have had beforehand. And that's why you got the results you got. And just continuing on your point of the NCAA's incompetence, I was talking to you before the show and how they hired Deloitte to do this, right? They hired Deloitte to do the NIL clearinghouse, which to me at this point, Dakota, is literally the only responsibility that the NCAA had. Like, what else are they responsible for? Like, what else are they supposed to be doing? So my question is, for the people employed at the NCAA, what is your day to day? Like, do you have any responsibilities and duties? Because, like, the one big undertaking that they had, they immediately hired a third party to do it all, which, again, we talked about how that might be good for conflict of interest reasons. But at the end of the day, it's like, dude, what are these people doing? You're not making good decisions for the sport. It took you all getting sued for $3 billion for you to come up with the idea of an NIL clearinghouse, which is something that should have existed long before. That should have been the idea before NIL was an idea. It's like, well, if we're going to do this, we need to make sure that there's not bogus NIL deals. Obviously, they couldn't even do that, and they constantly. My biggest issue with the NCAA is they constantly aren't thinking about the future of the sport, because at the end of the day, dude, the future of the sport benefits everybody. It benefits them, it benefits the players, and it benefits the fans, which the fans, some people in this discussion have kind of not really seen it from a fan perspective and have kind of looked at it from more of, okay, either the corporation's perspective or either the player's perspective. It's like the fans make this thing go. They do. At the end of the day, it's a $1 billion industry because of the fans. So the fans should be a part of this equation. So if you think about the future of the sport, you're satisfying all three of those things. The problem is when you have decision makers who are 80 years old, they don't really care about the future of the sport. They just don't, man. They care about their limited future. So to me, that's the biggest issue I have with the NCAA. You have to make decisions that benefit college football going forward and invest in the sport, because I want to see this sport thrive 40 years from now and 50 years from now and 150 years from now. And the decision makers, it doesn't feel like they've had that mindset.
Yeah, your 80-year-old comment kind of summarizes most issues in general. Um, yeah, at this point, I think NCAA employees are just auditing their incompetence. So they're just kind of going through making sure things are continuing to be run poorly. They're like, did we screw that up? Check. I'm done for the day.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm clocking out.
That's their day to day.
That's it. But yeah, I mean, you're 100% right. And that's where, again, it's frustrating to see what we've landed on and having to be happy with the situation that we've been given. Because if things were just done correctly in the beginning and thought out to any degree, because it's not even that they did it like partially, they literally didn't do it at all. Like
No.
NIL was introduced with zero regulation, zero.
And on top of that, they changed the transfer portal rules the same year,
Yeah,
immediately, which hurt,
and again,
which made things even worse on top of the NIL.
It exacerbated the problem beyond
Yes.
belief.
Yes.
You basically introduced an avenue for athletes to chase money and being able to do it with no repercussion, and for schools to be able to hand out money with no repercussions because they could do it at any level. And if NIL, we have the clearinghouse now as a solution, which could have resulted in a favor back then. And to be honest, what could have also just been a better solution from day one is that collectives and universities never having a hand in NIL. Like you could have a department, in my opinion, that handled like, almost like a third-party marketing agency type thing where you could help get an athlete in contact with Bose to do a headphones deal with them. But that's what it should have always been, right? It's just true NIL deals of being in a commercial, third-party companies sponsoring you, essentially, which would have been left up to the individual athletes. And it wouldn't have played as much of a role, I think, in locker rooms either, because with the NIL stuff, we've seen it firsthand. People were not happy with what happened with Nico in that locker room. Yep. But had it just been third-party deals where he had a Nike deal and somebody else had a Gus's Good Times Deli one, they would have been like,
that doesn't even go public. You don't even know what that number is because it doesn't go public. Exactly. It's between the athlete and the company.
Yep, exactly. And so it would have that instance of it would have been fine, right? Like that would have been a great way to introduce this, too well thought out for the NCAA. But then also to your point with the transfer portal, if another immediate solution that could have fixed a lot of that would be if we went back to the old transfer rules, right? Yes. That would have solved it as well. And the stipulation with that is if you are not eligible to play, you are not eligible to receive NIL compensation, which is not a crazy idea.
It's not, dude. And I've said that a lot. If you simply made it to where a player had to sit out a season and they could not earn NIL for that season after transferring, then you would cut the portal number by about 2/3. I think there would be at least 2/3 less portal players than we see right now across all sports. And that would fix a ton. But again, it was too much, man. They were too busy making sure they made the worst decision humanly possible to make that happen.
That's what it seems like. They sit down in the boardroom and they're like, okay, here's how it could be done. But what if we found the worst way to do it instead? And to your point with the transfer portal thing, like, I think you're right. 2/3 for sure, because that would have made universities, because obviously they still play a role in it to some degree of going after these kids and trying to get them to leave like UCLA did. But now if you're having to plan 2 to 3 years out of before you're even going to reap the benefits of that, How willing are you to hand out a ton of money for a future date when you don't get anything from it for a year either? That would have, I think that would have put schools a lot less likely to go chase guys like Nico after what just happened.
Yeah, exactly. And and that's another thing with all this, man. And I talked to you a little bit about this before the show, but a lot of the reason we got here is because of player empowerment and people saying, okay, players aren't being treated fairly, which that was partially true. That was partially true with not being able to own the rights to their name, image, and likeness. The problem with that, Dakota, is the way this was all done, the way the NCAA implemented it, and the way they changed the transfer rules and everything. I believe has hurt players as much as it's hurt fans. For one thing that we haven't touched on in the show, which we need to, is they could hire agents now, which is a good thing, right? Good thing you can hire an agent, you can use that agent to get NIL deals and whatnot. The problem is when you're dealing with a 16-year-old, 17-year-old being offered millions of dollars, they have a lot of the times they have poor guidance and they don't know what's right from wrong in these situations. So they hire an uncle to be an agent. The uncle signs them onto a deal where they earn like 25% of their earnings. And you've seen several situations where players sign over rights to their NFL earnings, the NFL earnings that they not even have yet. They literally sign over rights to career earnings, which includes NIL or NFL, excuse me, earnings. And of course, that's awful for the player. No agent's taking 25%. That is a ridiculous number. And no college agent, no agent that you're signing on with a 16 should be getting your NFL earnings. Absolutely not. That is absolutely absurd. So that happened to a lot of these young cats who know no better. Some of them come from bad backgrounds or are just young and they don't know how any of this works, which is totally understandable. As 16, I wouldn't have had any clue how any of this works, dude. And you just show me the $2 million check. I'm like, dude, where do I sign? You know,
Yeah.
and so that's a big issue with all this. Players have gotten absolutely screwed in that aspect of it, which again, the speed in which it happened, the auditing process that didn't exist before because the NCAA didn't think it out, all of that kind of caused that issue of players dealing with agents. And then two, I think we just got done talking about the transfer rules and all of that. That to me has not been good for players. I believe I already brought the stat that like 25 of the first rounders weren't transfers. That tells me that the dudes that are transferring, dude, are basically what they're doing when they do that. They transfer to a school. They're sacrificing their potential future for short-term gain. And that is just not good. It seems good in the moment because, okay, I'm signing this NIL deal for however much, but when you transfer 3 or 4 times, it hurts your development as a player and you potentially leave a program that you were best fit for just because you went to chase more money or you signed on with a program initially that you were less fit for because they offered you more money. And that's happened several cases. I believe we have Nico on the screen right now. We'll talk about Nico again. If Nico if these all these rules weren't in place, I believe he would have never signed with Tennessee. He would have went to UCLA in the first place. And B, if the transfer rules didn't exist, he potentially could have stayed at Tennessee and became a better player for it. Potentially. Who knows how that would have worked out. So it's hurt the players all around. It seemed like it was good for the players, and it is good for the players. They're getting paid now, so that is good for them. However, it's hurt a lot of these players as well, I think, in the long run, especially.
I think that's a very good point, and it goes back to things that were happening in the past. And I think it was the Kansas instance when, like, players when they were getting paid under the table, right? Like, rarely the school and like coaches were taking the fall for that a lot. And it's the same thing you're talking about. If you offer a 17-year-old who's coming from a rough background 500 grand to come play at your school, they're going to do that because they're trying to just take their best interest right now, which is that. And then they were the ones that kind of reap the punishment of that the most. And It's exactly what's happening now, where you're dangling things like that in front of kids. To be honest, you're taking advantage of them. You are like you are manipulating children with money,
Yep.
to not necessarily do what's in their best interest, and that's sad to see. And then, to your point with the development piece as well, like we kind of saw that. I mean, it's hard to find like the full stat, and obviously former 4 and 5 star players go undrafted. It happens, but look at guys like Julian Fleming, who was a top guy out of college. I think he went to USC, then transferred to Penn State, goes undrafted. Brew McCoy with us, that happened with him. Even Isaiah Bond, who crazily went, happened with him. But like, there was a lot of players in this draft, to your point, that were guys that transferred as high recruits, ended up going undrafted, and it's probably because they never developed. Because like, it's something we talk about a lot at the NFL level of learning a new system, right? Like that's a big part of just being a player. And doing that in college, I would assume, is tougher for a lot of kids, because you're younger, you don't understand the game quite as well. So you're always going to be a step behind when you transfer somewhere. You now have to learn something else. So you're stunting your growth as an athlete and a football player, and that's, yeah. I think hopefully with what has happened now will help resolve that. But a shame that it happened to essentially, like, what, 4 to 5 years worth of kids have been probably affected by that negatively.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
and it, again, a shame that it happened because of something that was just implemented poorly.
It was exactly because I think if it's implemented a different way, I think it
It doesn't happen.
solves the problem. It solves the issue. I also wonder how, from a quarterback perspective in particular, how many of these dudes that are staying in college for NIL money are maybe hurting themselves. And what I mean by that, specifically this year, Garrett Nussmeier. Garrett Nussmeier comes back to LSU, is probably getting a good bag in NIL. I'm curious if, with a weak quarterback class, it's going to be a weaker class. This year's class with Cam Ward is going to be weaker than next year's.
Correct.
That's a fact. Like, would he have been a first rounder? In that pre-draft process, and so many things changed throughout the pre-draft process, right? Like, let's not forget, going into last year's draft, the very beginning, there was still debate between Cam Ward and Shadur Sanders. That was still a
Right. Yep.
debate. And everything changed when you got into interviews, when you learned more about the players. Like, it was clear that Cam Ward loved football, and Shador, had all the other things outside of football. And so one elevated themselves to a first overall pick, and one fell to the 5th round. So where does a guy like Garrett Nussmeier fall in that? Or Drew Aller, who came back for
That's what I was going
money?
to mention. Yeah, Jarrell is fantastic because a lot of people, regardless of what you think of him, a lot of people were saying if he was in this
Yes.
class, he's probably QB2 for sure.
And it's a weaker class too. Also, Josh Pate. A lot. If you're watching this, you definitely know who Josh Pate is. College football analyst. He brought up a fantastic point about Quinn Ewers. A lot of people criticize Quinn Ewers, like, you idiot. You left millions of dollars on the table, not transferring and going to a place like Oregon to be a starting quarterback in the college football, and then you got drafted in the 7th round. What a moron. Pate made such a fascinating point that sometimes, in a specific case like Quinn Ewers, when you're the quarterback at Texas and you leave your school to go to the NFL playing for Texas, right? It's different. Once you transfer, the last school you played for is the school you're known for. That's a fact. That's happened with every quarterback. But when you graduate from Texas, the long-term effects, like impact of that throughout your entire life, right? Going back to campus, autograph signings on, like, all of that is worth so much more than the one deal, the $3 million deal on the table that season, which is a fascinating. I think that's a great point. Now, that's not going to apply to everyone. That's a very specific instance because it's the Texas Longhorns. That's a different level of brand, but that's a great point, man. That's a situation where I think Quinn probably made the best decision, because over years' time, he'll gain a lot of benefit by being known as a Texas Longhorn quarterback.
And I bet they did weigh that of like what his NIL deal would have been, plus the chances that he played well enough there to change his draft stock, right? Because it only matters if If he goes to Oregon and then plays lights out and becomes a first round pick, then the money's there. But it almost seems like between the injuries he's also had consistently in that the assessment was probably the ROI was done, and that his camp, his family probably said, this is going to be your best long term play for yourself.
Especially looking at the quarterback classes, like if you couldn't get in the first round of a quarterback
Of this
class
one.
that had
Yeah.
just Cam Ward, you're definitely not going to in the next one.
Next
With
one, yeah.
yeah, so yeah, dude. I mean, it's obvious. All of this is a case by case basis. Another guy we haven't touched on yet is the Bryce Underwood stuff and where NIL went wrong, which is, I mean, pretty obvious. Like the Bryce Underwood situation is just kind of like, to me, it's the poster child of a lot of this, because it was a
Yeah.
guy in Dave Portnoy just openly saying, okay,
Yep.
we're paying this guy. I'm paying this guy directly to go to my alma mater to play for my school. And like, nobody, that's obviously tampering and recruiting and everything. Like, you have like this guy who has a very heavy social media presence. I think he has like 4 million followers on Twitter, is openly recruiting this guy to come play here for money. Like, and that was perfectly legal. Like,
Yep.
there was no issue with that. That's not breaking the rules.
He would literally openly, to the point where he was talking about like the conversations he directly had with Bryce Underwood and his family, of just being on the phone with them talking about these things, which is, I think you're right. That is the poster child for the problem with NIL, of like from the recruiting aspect side of it, right? Of like what a deal would look like and kids coming out and what they should be able to do. Um, and it's just wild. And I think that deal, what they said, between 10 to 12 and a half million, and over 4 years. And one thing that, with you bringing that up, like, we haven't definitively found an answer to this, but from what everything we can find and read, it sounds like NIL deals pre this decision are kind of unaffected. So any future thing he does will have to go through that clearinghouse. But basically, if you did just sign a guy to a big deal, you kind of did it at the perfect time, because now, unless there's more information could come out, but in the current way how we understand it, it seems like signing somebody right before this, it was the best case scenario.
Yeah, exactly. And that's interesting to me, because I mean, that could greatly benefit a school like Michigan, who, by the way, like, yes, they lost more talent, but that's a team that feels like they're going to be back to competing very quickly. Like, they didn't have a great year last year, but they're still recruiting pretty decently. They just got Bryce Underwood. Like, I could easily see Michigan being right back to where they were just a couple of years ago. And now they have their quarterback locked up for 3 or 4 years outside of the salary cap. So they can use, they kind of have a rookie contract quarterback, if you will, Dakota, because you signed your quarterback before the salary cap is implemented. So now you can use the salary cap to load up around your quote rookie contract quarterback, which is going to be fascinating to see how they kind of take advantage of that.
And I'd be curious to see if people complain about it, right? Like that could be something you see happen before the season starts. If some of these teams are sitting there, Ohio State's sitting there like, well, that's kind of an unfair advantage within our conference, that they basically have a 12.5 million. So let's say it is 12.5, a $4 million cap hit that doesn't count.
Yeah,
That's on their roster right now.
It doesn't count at all. So you can use that 4 million to go load up at wide receiver.
There you go. I mean, yeah, that is going to be an interesting thing, and the same thing is also true for UCLA. We'll touch on the other guy on the overlay of a Nico. UCLA gets lucky with that too, that they go get the guy they wanted originally when trying to recruit him out of high school. We lost our guy because of it, regardless of how we feel about it. But they just went and picked him up right before all of this happened, and will probably be one of the last instances of stealing a guy from a school because of things like this.
True. They also got a discount on him, so he's actually
You're welcome.
less now than he made before, plus the taxes. So he's making significantly less. But yeah, I mean, any teams that have locked up their quarterbacks, it's interesting from a Tennessee perspective, because like we have McIntyre on the roster, but Faison isn't in yet. And like,
Nope.
what was he promised? Like what was he promised? Because now he's going to have to go through the legitimate NIL, if these things work the way they should, and the salary cap. And so that should result in less money, I would guess.
You would think.
So It's gonna be interesting, dude. Like how
And
all this will change, and yeah, dude, you're definitely gonna see less of teams. We'll touch on the last guy on the graphic, but less teams like Miami paying Carson Beck $4 million. Like, um, you're gonna see less of that with the salary cap.
yeah, and he is the last example of, I feel like they are the three poster children right now for NIL of a guy that, not entirely sure how Georgia felt about him leaving, but he was a guy that people were thinking could enter the draft and at one point was getting hyped up before the season, but then decides to leave for a massive NIL deal. And with Nico, you know, funnily enough, we have one season of it. He could be the first and only NIL holdout, right?
Yeah.
But now could open the door for you. We could see legitimate holdouts now, though, right?
Oh,
Because if you're under contract for
yes.
2 or 3 years, let's say you outplay that. Because think about
Yep.
3 stars, right?
Think,
James Pierce Jr. Let's use him as an example. Dude just got drafted in the first round. He was a 3 star for those that don't know. After his sophomore season, where he looked ridiculous, holding out to
that
get a better
money's gonna
contract for that
go
salary
up.
cap.
Yep.
Yeah, that's going to happen
Exactly.
now.
Or it doesn't even have to be a 3 star. Think about
No, it
Jeremiah
doesn't.
Smith. Jeremiah Smith was the best player in college football last year. He just so happened to be a freshman 5 star wide receiver who is 18 years old and would, if draft eligible, would have been a top 5 draft pick. Um, he's going to be wanting more money in this new setup. Like, listen, he's going to agree to whatever, and it's going to be a good chunk of change because he's a 5 star. But it's like, dude, listen, you're going to get more talk of I'm not the highest paid wide receiver in college football. That's what you're going to be getting.
The Jamar.
How many times do we see that in the NFL? I want to be the highest paid player at this position or that position. Like Myles Garrett's contract, he got $40 million a year to be an edge rusher, by far the highest paid edge rusher in the NFL, and he should be. A guy like Dylan Stewart out of South Carolina is going to be like, listen, I'm the best edge rusher in college football. I need to be paid like it.
Yeah, and it opens up a really interesting with my 3 star, example too. Though, what becomes a wild card for these college football teams is if expecting that, and like, do you
Yeah.
want that necessarily to happen when you've already allocated a salary cap to these 4 and 5 stars? You're paying your threes, whatever, but when you have a walk-on come out and look like he's about to be a first-round draft pick, you now have to how do you move the money around to pay that guy? Because you almost don't want your 3 stars to break out too much now, because now you're going to have to move some money around. You may have to try to cut a guy or let a guy walk.
And how will cuts work? Like, that's another thing. You sign a guy to a 2-year deal, your 3 star, let's say you bring on like 4 edge rushers in the class, but your 3 star and James Pierce outplays your 5 star. Well, all of a sudden you're going to be wanting to cut your 5 star just so that you can keep your 3 star around. So, like, this just adds on to my point, dude. Coaches cannot manage this. If you want to be a winning team, a head coach is not going to be able to manage all this, because it seems like this is the way we're going, right? Like, this is everything we're talking about. Doesn't it feel like we're headed down that route? So if you're trying to be a head coach and you're trying to become like scheme and game plan and all of this, there is absolutely no way you're going to be able to manage these things.
God, and your point too, like, it's almost impossible to imagine a scenario where cutting isn't a thing unless the contracts or the way this is designed basically requires the school to allocate that salary cap to that player, that revenue sharing, no matter what, which would be kind of crazy to put that burden on them, especially like how injuries will play into that. But, and then I guess like with cutting, if they do then cut, is that just like automatic into the transfer portal, or is that, is the transfer portal going to evolve, right? Like, is it no longer going to be that, or is it just going to be like the free agent portal or the free agency pool that college athletes go into?
It's just going to be head coaches telling the players to go ahead and get one of those like BS Twitter accounts to make you a portal graphic. You're going to need a portal graphic, buddy. You might as
was it Haas Hayes Fawcett or whatever?
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead and get them to make you a portal graphic, because you're no longer going to be on this football team.
Yeah. And they're texting the dude at On3 to say, get that cut graphic ready for this player.
Get that cut graphic ready. Exactly. It's going to be fascinating, dude. And then you have like the spring portal and how that's going to look like. How, like, when do you need your roster set by? That's another thing.
Yeah.
When do you need your roster set by? and like how our cuts going to work in the spring. Like it's going to be interesting, dude. I think it's going to, like, the more we talk about it, I think it's the more it's going to form into like the NFL style. Like we're going to see breaking news, Tennessee cuts like these 6 players and are targeting, so and so in the portal or whatever.
And one thing I meant to touch on earlier with the allocation piece too, but it ties into this is I think there's going to be a couple year learning curve for every university, and
Yep.
somebody's probably going to figure out like the method to the madness before others. But I guarantee you'll see some, and there's going to be probably flips back and forth, right? Where like, let's say Tennessee does allocate 75% to football, and then our college basketball program takes a step back. We'll probably swing it a bit in the other direction to try to rectify that. So one season football, that's going to be a tough job for somebody to manage. Of how
Yeah.
do we keep our athletics at a certain level now? But the same thing's true from just a managing of the cap and the GM perspective. Like these schools that do hire really good GMs may see an immediate impact of being better than others because they've done a better job managing all of this.
I was literally just about to say that, because how often do we see it in the NFL? A GM making, like, being the difference of a football team,
True.
like Howie Roseman. I mean, with the Eagles. I mean, the Eagles are
Yes.
one of the best ran organizations right now, and it's not because Howie's some football genius. It's because they have a good player personnel department, and Howie works his salary cap really, really well, and they're able to identify talent. And so I think you're going to see, especially with, like we talked about earlier, it's theoretically things are more equal now as far as how much you
Right.
can spend on players. I think having a savvy GM will be the difference. Like that could absolutely be the difference in a team being competitive or not. Also, just kind of circling back to discussing if the GM's going to cover all the sports, that could be a problem. If you do end up hiring multiple GMs for each sport, uh, I mean, the basketball GM is going to be fine. Hey, we need, an extra 2 million to go make the basketball team more competitive. So you're going to have more internal conflict, especially even between coaches and a GM being like,
I bet
listen,
that, yeah.
we need more resources in this sport if we want to continue to be competitive.
Yeah. And some of that was probably going on with NIL, and now you add another
Yeah.
layer to it.
Yep.
You add just more layers to the onion. And for those, and for context, for some that, maybe aren't as big of NFL fans that are tuning in from a college, like a lot of GMs come from like legal backgrounds. A lot of them have law degrees. A lot of them come from actuarial backgrounds, essentially risk assessment, because that's what you're having to do.
Yep.
So it does add an entire new component to college athletics from that perspective. And you need somebody with that level of knowledge. And the people who hire them, and maybe why Steve missed out on the job opportunity at Michigan State, is they were like, "Nah, we don't know what we're doing. We need somebody who can handle contract
Yeah.
language and knows
Exactly.
that in and out."
Yeah, because I think Steve would be coming from it from more of like a player personnel
Team,
perspective,
yeah,
and
yeah.
targeting the right kind of players and things of that nature.
And other
Whereas,
teams may prioritize that, right?
yeah,
Like that's where we'll see
exactly.
this lay out.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why you have to have a whole department of it, because that's how NFL
Yeah.
front offices work. You have the GM, he's the ultimate decision maker as far as like who they're going to pick or whatever in the draft. But ultimately, like you said, they're more so trying to balance the books, right? They're trying to manage all these contracts, the risk assessment, and things like that. It's more so your scouts and your player personnel department that's making the decisions on, okay, this is the player we want to target, and like this is the group of players that we want to try to go target in recruiting or whatever. So I think that's how it's going to play out, man. It's really going to be interesting to see like where the sport is even 5 years from now,
Yeah.
because I think it is going to form more like the NFL, which it could ultimately hurt college football, because a lot of college fans, as we know, we have buddies like this that are college football fans and not fans of the NFL, and they like college football
Yep.
for what it was. And I kind of understand that. Like we're fans of
Yeah.
both, so we kind of like the way both were for a long time. And it is kind of sad to see it kind of that it's going to go down this road. It feels like.
Yeah. And we can, we'll wrap up now. And, with one thing too, just quickly with the GM thing, you touched on it earlier, but it will be fascinating. Like with the GM aspect, how does that work with the GM versus the coach and versus because it's very different than an NFL front office and the coaching aspect. So things like that. I mean, there's going to be a million other things we think of and that come to light. And to your point with the 5-year outlook on this, who knows what's going to happen? And one thing too is I'm sure all of us are being short-sighted or oversighting right now where there's probably going to be some massive flaw even to this that we're not thinking of
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
somebody's going to
exactly.
expose soon.
Yep.
And the end of the day, we had everything in place, and legal tampering, collusion, everything was going on. Paying under the table was still happening. So all of those things are still likely. But
Yeah. Very
I guess
likely.
final summary from my perspective in terms of what all happened. Like again,
We'll
it
see.
seems like a reasonable solution to a horrible situation that could have been avoided massively, and it's unfortunate that we're here. We'll keep our you know skeptical optimism in line, but I think this first year we'll probably learn a lot, and it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to just see how every university handles things differently.
Yeah, I think that's kind of my lukewarm take on it, right? We're trying to stop the takes on this podcast. We just have to see. We'll see
Yeah,
where it goes. There's definitely going to be issues with it. Like we saw when NIL was passed through and all of that, and DJ Ungalungale got his Dr. Pepper deal. It was celebrated. Like all of that was celebrated. And then about a year later, things started going downhill. So it takes time. Like we're gonna have to see how it plays out and how all this works. Keep in mind, it took the NCAA getting sued for $3 billion for this to take place. So like, let's be skeptical. We should be skeptical of the future and how it's all going to play out. But either way, we'll be here covering it, brother.
yeah. Regardless of how dystopian it becomes, or torn apart, or chaotic, we will be there. That's for sure. And speaking of that, now I'm not traveling. I still will travel for work some, but I think we'll be good. But we will be live Thursdays currently. That's our goal. Be live Thursdays at 7 Eastern every week. What those videos will be, what these shows will be, will kind of vary week to week. Probably a little bit more NFL content. Got some ideas. We got a lot of ideas in the bucket. So we'll start pumping some of those things out, which will change before the season. Once we get into the NFL season, we kind of have more of a 2 week schedule. But and we'll also always try to go live for any big breaking news. Granted, we can, and it's not at 9 a.m. on a workday. Unfortunately, this is not our full-time job.
Yeah, exactly. We would love that, but unfortunately, it is not.
Yeah, so we will try to go live when big things break. But yeah, Thursdays, 7 Eastern. We will be live on YouTube, so join in. Appreciate everybody that tuned into this. Please like, share, subscribe, do all those fun things. Leave us a comment. Love seeing what everybody else to think. And this is a huge topic, so would love to see what everybody's thoughts are. We'll shout out disgruntled Dan Snyder fan. He's a Power fan right now. Having good conversations with him on videos. We'll give you a shout out. This is college, so may not be as more in your world, but would love to hear your thoughts on this stuff. So, yeah, appreciate it as always, everybody. And until next time.
Thanks for talking ball with us.